There was a study published not too long ago, and when I read it for the first time, I had to stop and read it all over again. Scientists at the University of Geneva did something that very few researchers had done before. They collected blood samples from hundreds of people who had lived past 100 years old, then analyzed thousands of molecules circulating inside those samples. And what they found was not a special gene, not some secret medication. What they found is something that all of us either still have or are slowly losing right now. If you are 55, 60, 65 years old, then what I am about to share with you is not a story about the distant future. It is something happening inside your body today. And the most concerning part is that most people have no idea this is going on until it is too late to make much of a difference. They were over 100 years old, but their bodies did not show it. The results from this study, known as the Swiss 100 Project, were genuinely remarkable. When researchers compared the blood of people who lived past 100 with that of typical older adults who did not reach that threshold, they discovered something unexpected. Many of the people in the longest living group had biological markers in their blood that looked as though they were decades younger than their actual age. Not just a little younger, decades younger. Think about that for a moment. Someone who is 102 years old, but the internal systems of their body are functioning like someone in their mid-70s or early 80s. That does not happen by luck. It happens because something specific is being preserved inside their bodies that most of us are gradually losing with every passing year. And what surprised me most was not simply that these people lived a long time. What surprised me was that two specific systems in their blood were still functioning at a level that most of us lose track of far earlier in life. What those two systems are and why they matter deeply to anyone who is around your age right now is exactly what we are going to walk through together. The silent enemy your body is fighting every single day. The first system that scientists found still intact in these long-lived individuals has to do with something called oxidative stress, or in simpler terms, the process of oxidation happening inside your cells. That might sound complicated, but it is actually very easy to picture. You have probably seen what happens when you cut an apple and leave it sitting out in the air for a little while. It starts turning brown. That is oxidation. And your body is going through a very similar process every single day at the cellular level. The body produces harmful molecules as a natural byproduct of normal activity, and if the protective system is not strong enough to handle them in time, they build up and gradually break down the internal structure of your cells. What makes this especially concerning is that this process happens in complete silence. You do not feel it. No pain, no unusual fatigue, no obvious signs at all. But day by day, if your body's defense system is weakening, those small injuries add up. And the people who lived past 100 in that study had one thing in common. Their antioxidant systems were still working with remarkable efficiency despite their advanced age. That did not happen by accident, and we are going to talk about why in just a moment. But first, I want to tell you about the second system, because according to many researchers, this may be the most important and the least talked about factor in everything we know about aging. The second system, what determines how much energy you have left to live. The second system that scientists paid close attention to is called metabolic efficiency, or in practical terms, how well your body converts food into energy in a clean and effective way. When this system is working well, you have steady energy throughout the day, your mind feels clear, and your body handles what you eat without much difficulty. When it starts to decline, you begin noticing things that many of us have grown so used to that we assume they are just a normal part of getting older. Feeling tired after meals, struggling to manage your weight, blood sugar that swings up and down, that foggy, heavy feeling in your head during the afternoon. And here's what a lot of people do not realize. Those signs are not just minor inconveniences in your daily life. They are early warning signals that one of the most important systems in your body is gradually losing its strength. A study from the National Institutes of Health found that after age 40, the human body begins experiencing metabolic changes that, if not properly supported, will accumulate over time and significantly impact long-term health. And the longest living individuals in the Swiss 100 study shared one consistent trait. Their metabolic systems were in a state that looked far younger than their actual age. What does that mean for you? It means this is not a story about genetics or luck. It is a story about what is happening inside your body every day, and you have far more influence over that than you probably think. Why most of us are going in the wrong direction without knowing it. There is something I see quite often, and not just with patients, but with people around me in everyday life. When people reach their mid-50s or 60s, they tend to shift their focus more toward managing illness, checking blood pressure, monitoring cholesterol, taking medications on schedule, and all of that matters. Nobody is saying otherwise. But there is an important difference between managing disease and actually building a strong foundation from the inside out. Most of us are playing defense. We are waiting until something goes wrong and then trying to fix it. But the people who lived to 100 with bodies that were still functioning well, they were not only playing defense. Something inside their bodies was being actively maintained, and that started long before any symptoms ever appeared. What is notable is that, according to the researchers, the lifestyle factors we have known about for a long time, things like diet, movement, and sleep, are exactly what directly influence those two systems in the blood. Not through any magical food, but through how you live each day, building up over time. I know that might not sound new, but hear me out on why it matters far more than most people actually understand, especially when you are somewhere between 55 and 70 years old. The window of time most people do not know they still have. This is the part I really want you to sit with for a moment. There is a period in a person's life, typically from the mid-50s through the late 60s, where the body still has enough capacity to adapt and recover in ways that are genuinely meaningful. Not the way it did when you were 30, that is true, but enough to make a real difference in the next 20 to 30 years of your life. And a lot of people miss that window entirely because they have convinced themselves that they are already too old for change to matter much. That is the most expensive misconception a person can hold about their own health. An analysis published by researchers at Harvard showed that even when someone begins making lifestyle changes in their mid or late 50s, the long-term impact on health outcomes is still significant, not slightly better, significant. And what drives that difference is not something exotic or out of reach, but it does require understanding what your body actually needs right now, rather than following what everyone says without a real foundation behind it. The next part is where I want you to pay the closest attention, because this is where the science and the reality of everyday life come together in a very specific way. 3 things the longest living people almost always had in common. When researchers looked at the full picture, not just the blood work, but the actual daily lives of these centenarians, 3 things stood out with remarkable consistency. And I want to be clear, this is not a checklist of things you should do in the lecture-style sense. These are what the science shows actually affects the biological systems we just talked about. The first is regular physical movement at a moderate level, not marathons, not 2 hours at the gym every day. Research consistently shows that people who maintain a steady habit of movement, even something as simple as 30 minutes of walking each day combined with some basic strength work to preserve muscle, have measurably better antioxidant and metabolic function compared to those who are sedentary. The reason is that movement stimulates the body to naturally produce compounds that protect cells. No supplement does that as effectively. This is not new information, but when you look at it through the lens of what is actually happening in the blood of people who reach 100 years old, it takes on an entirely different meaning. The second is a diet built around whole foods while limiting refined sugar and heavily processed products. Again, not a new headline. But the specific reason why it matters is something most people have not fully understood. Processed foods and refined sugar increase the oxidative burden on the body and disrupt metabolic function, the exact 2 systems we have been talking about. And on the flip side, vegetables, whole fruits, fish, nuts, and similar foods give the body precisely the tools it needs to keep those 2 systems running. Not in some mysterious way, in a very concrete and well-documented biochemical way. The third, and this is the one I see undervalued most often in conversations about aging, is sleep. Sleep is when the body carries out most of its cellular repair and restoration. When you are not sleeping enough or not sleeping deeply, the body does not have sufficient time to process the small accumulated damage from each day. Over time, that puts real pressure on both the antioxidant system and the metabolic system. And here is what makes this particularly important. After 60, the quality of most people's sleep begins to shift in ways they often do not notice or do not take seriously enough. These 3 things are not a perfect prescription for every single person. Everyone has their own health situation. But if you look honestly at these three areas and ask yourself how well you are actually doing in each one, you will have a clearer picture of where you stand in that larger story. What happens if you keep ignoring the signals your body is already sending? I am not trying to frighten you, but I also do not want to talk around this. When the two systems we discussed, the antioxidant system and the metabolic system, continue to weaken without support, the consequences are not just that you feel a bit worse day to day. The consequences are a gradual increase in the risk of serious conditions: cardiovascular disease, cognitive decline, type 2 diabetes, and a range of other outcomes that all of us want to avoid. And what makes this especially difficult is that most of the signs of that decline are not obvious until they have been building for years. But here's what I want you to hold on to. The people in the Swiss 100 study were not uniquely fortunate on a genetic level. The analysis showed that genetics accounts for only about 20 to 30% of longevity. The rest comes down to environment and lifestyle. That means your story is not finished. And if you are watching this video, there is a good chance you are at exactly the age where change can still make a real and lasting difference. A doctor's final words. Before we close, I want to speak directly to you. Not as a physician reading through a list of recommendations, but as someone who has spent years watching what actually makes a difference in the long-term health of older adults. The most important thing is not how much you can change right away. The most important thing is starting to see your health not just through the lens of whether or not you have a diagnosed illness, but through the lens of what state your internal systems are actually in. Are you moving enough to keep your body capable of protecting itself? Are you eating in a way that supports your metabolic function? Are you sleeping in a way that gives your body the time it needs to genuinely recover? If the answer to any one of those questions is not sure or not really, then that is exactly where to begin. Not by overhauling everything at once, but with one thing done consistently and kept up over time. Because that is how the people in that study, the ones whose blood still looked decades younger than their actual age, built the foundation for the long and healthy lives they lived. Not through one dramatic turning point, but through thousands of small daily choices made consistently across many decades. You do not need to start over from scratch. You just need to know where you stand and begin from there. And if you are watching this video, you have already taken the first step.